Welcome back to our third installment of 1 month of Torah in 5 minutes. I'm Rabbi Lisa Delson, and this video is for our 6th grade class as they prepare for their bar and bat mitzvahs. So just to catch you up a little bit from last time, we were just freed from slavery in Egypt, and God and Moses split the Red Sea so all of the Israelites could travel through without threat of the Egyptians after all. From it. This Torah portion, the first one that we're going to talk about, is called Yitro. And during this Torah portion, we learn about Moses' father-in-law, who comes to tell them that God is great, and also comes to give Moses some advice that he can't do everything on his own, and that he needs a system of delegates to help him answer questions that the Israelites were having, because with their freedom, they also didn't have any laws yet. So Moses was answering all of the questions because he was the closest to God. So Jethro, or Yitro, said that this wasn't good for him and that he needed to have others to help. Also, during this Torah portion, we learn about the 10 Commandments and God and Moses on Mount Sinai. So this covenant that was created or reestablished at this point was marked by God recalling what God did for the Israelites, and now that they have the commandments, to uphold their end of the bargain. So the Israelite people said, "We'll do it, no problem." And thus the covenant was accepted, and it's the same covenant that we live by today. The Israelite people all stood there and accepted the law and watched the mountain shake and rage with fire because God's presence was there. During this utterance, the Israelite people heard just the first 2 commandments from God and Moses, and then Moses just gave them the rest of them at the end because it was too much for them to handle. So just a recap of the 10 commandments, you probably already know this, but the first one is, "I am Adonai, your God." The second one is, "You shall have no other gods beside God." The third one, "You shall not swear falsely by God." Number 4 is, "Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy." Number 5 is, "Honor your father and your mother." 6 is, "Do not murder." 7 is, "Do not commit adultery." 8 is, "Do not steal." 9 is, "Do not bear false witness against your neighbor." And 10 is, "Do not covet." So the next Torah portion is called Mishpatim, and this Torah portion this word means laws or rules. So during this, Moses appoints judges to judge what the people have done. It first begins with the discussion of owning slaves and then talks about murder. Not quite things that we always like to talk about. So when dealing with murder, we find out one of the most famous and most misunderstood parts of the Torah. So it's talking about the penalty shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and bruise for bruise. That is quite a list. Even though we find it in the Torah, our ancient rabbis described it as an unfair rule. It is really about damages. So if you injure someone, you should pay them for their pain and suffering, not actually tear out their eye. No, not a good plan. So these laws and rules continue throughout this Torah portion, but keep in mind they're important for the narrative that the Israelite people were new to all of this freedom and new to this covenant, and so they needed boundaries just like we all do. So the third Torah portion in our 5 minutes is Terumah, which is gifts. And this Torah portion starts out by God speaking to Moses saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept them for me, for every person whose heart is moved to give." So this is really our first instance of tzedakah in one sense from our Torah. And so what does God ask for? God asks for crimson and purple and gold and blue and copper and silver and dolphin skins. Where do they get dolphin skins? And acacia wood. And so God set out all of the measurements and dimensions, and they were to build this tabernacle or this mishkan for God to dwell among the people, and something that is portable so that they could all move it together as they move throughout the desert. Okay, so the next one is called Tetzaveh, and it means to instruct. And it is filled with God's instructions about the furniture that should go in the Mishkan, like the lamps and the incense. During this Torah portion, we also learn about Aaron and his sons becoming the priests, and we learn about the Ner Tamid, which is the eternal light. So the next time you come to temple, you can see our Ner Tamid, our eternal light that is always shining brightly to show us that God's presence is always with us. So the last Torah portion in our grouping this month is called Ki Tisa, and if this sounds familiar, it's probably a good thing. It's one of our more famous ones because it has to do with the golden calf. So Moses is still hanging around on Mount Sinai with God and taking a little bit of time, but there's a lot for him to learn. And so while he's up on the mountain, these two other guys, Bezalel and Oholiab, are designing, imagining even more the Mishkan to build for God. They're artists. So Aaron, Moses' brother, was with all of the people down in the desert or the wilderness, but they wanted God and Moses' direction. So to keep them quiet for a little bit longer, Aaron asked them to go bring all of their gold and to bring it to him so that they would cast a golden calf. And they decided that after they built it, the following day would be a day for God. So you can imagine why they were getting worried. Once again, they were left in the desert and there was no help or no leadership. But what they did was a big, big no-no. God even threatened to destroy them and start all over again. So Moses went down the mountain and saw the two with his two tablets, and he was completely enraged because he's been working so hard to get all these commandments for all of the people. And unfortunately, it was awful and there was a lot of bloodshed. But the story isn't over here. Moses might have also been a little bit worried about God's commitment to them. So Moses asked to see God face to face. And God kind of allows it. So God tells him to stand in the cleft in the mountain, and God's presence would pass by, and Moses would be able to see God's back, whatever that means. So, and at the end of this Torah portion, we also hear about the 10 Commandments once again. So this was a pretty intense grouping of Torah portions. The question for this month is, why do you think God needed a Mishkan, or a place to dwell in the desert? And why did it need to be so decorated and so opulent? So as you're watching with your family, I hope you have a chance to talk about this question, and I'll see you next month.